See, I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the key," he continued, ignoring me. "So does our dad," said Nola. "No," replied Holden. "No, he doesn't. You saw him do it," I said, a little sharper than I meant to sound. Holden grinned. "Your dad locks the blinds." "Yeah, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it right on his normal keychain." "So?" I asked, worried I already knew what he would say next, because I had noticed that my dad didn't bother hiding the key anymore after all of these years, because he knew we took it seriously. "So, after your dad locked up, but before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom, and on my way, I may have peeked into their room, and I may have seen your dad's keychain on his nightstand, and I may have gone and borrowed the key to the blinds." Nola and I stared, and his grin only grew wider. "You're lying," I said. Holden shrugged. "You can check if you want. Just open your parents' door and look. You'll see his keychain right there on the nightstand. Stay here," I told both of them. "Don't move a muscle." I hurried over to my parents' room, but hesitated at the door. If Holden wasn't lying, my dad would be angry. Beyond angry, I was scared thinking about it, but more scared of an open window, with the whistler right outside. I opened the door, barely an inch, and looked in, but it was too dark to see. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the room. 2 steps into the dark, I froze. The whistling started, and I could hear it clearly. From my parents' room, I never realized, but they must have heard the sound every night since we moved into the house. They never told us. I don't think I could have slept through it. I stood there, listening to the whistling come closer, unsure whether I should turn on a light or call out for my dad. Soft sounds from the living room brought me back to reality. "Nola," I yelled, running out of my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing near the front door next to a window. Holden wasn't lying. I could see him fumbling with the lock on one of the blinds. I heard a click. He did have the key. Holden let out a quick laugh. Nola stood next to him, hunched up, afraid but maybe curious. The whistling was right outside our house now. "I think I made a sound," called out. I can't remember. Time felt frozen, clock hands nailed to the face, but I found myself moving. I'm not fast. I've never been athletic. Somehow, though, I covered the space between myself and Nola in a moment. My eyes were locked on her, but I heard Holden pull the blind all the way down so it could release. I heard the snap of it start to raise, and I heard the whistling just on the other side of the window. But I had my arms around Nola, and I turned us so she was facing away from the window. At the same time, I jammed my eyes shut. The blind whipped open. The whistling stopped. I felt Nola shaking in my arms. "Don't look, okay?" I told her. "Don't turn around." We were positioned so that she was facing back towards the hallway, and I was facing the window. My eyes were still closed. I felt her nod into my shoulder. I reached out with the arm, not holding Nola, and tried to touch Holden. My hand brushed against his arm. He was shaking worse than Nola. "Holden," I asked. Silence. I reached past him and gingerly felt for the window. Eyes still sealed shut. The glass was cold against my fingertips, colder than it should have been for the time of year. I moved my hand up the window, searching for the string to the blind. The glass began to get warmer the further I reached, and there was a gentle hum feeding back into my fingertips. I tried not to think about what might be on the other side of the window. Finally, I touched the string and yanked the blinds shut. I opened my eyes. In the dim light leaking out from the kitchen, I could make out Holden, pale and small, staring at the now closed window. "Holden?" I asked again. He turned towards me and he screamed. Everything became a flurry of motion. Lights sparked to life in the hall. Then the living room. My parents' footsteps thudded across the hardwood floor. I didn't turn to look back at them. My eyes were glued to Holden. He was pale, had bit his lip so hard. There was a thin red line of blood running down his chin, and he'd wet himself. What happened? My dad asked from behind me. I managed to swivel away from Holden and look back. He looked. I'd never seen my dad scared before, but I saw it that night. In that moment, an old, ugly terror stitched on his face, a parent's fear. Just Holden, he mouthed to me. I nodded yes. My dad let out a breath. He looked so relieved. I nearly expected him to cheer, but then he turned to Holden, and my dad's face changed. I wondered if he felt bad for feeling good, that Holden was the only one that looked. There was a knock at the door. We all froze. Holden whimpered. "Don't answer it," my mom said. She stood at the threshold of the hall. I'd always thought she was a skeptic, and just humored my dad about the windows and the whistler. But that night, we were all believers. I noticed that both of my parents held baseball bats. They must have taken from their bedroom. The knock came again, a little louder this time. "Please don't open the door," Holden whispered. My dad walked over to him, hugged him close. "We won't," my dad promised, still holding his bat. "Nothing is coming in here tonight." Thud, thud, thud. This time, the knocking was loud enough to rattle the door. Holden screamed again, and Nola clutched her arms around my neck. My mom came over and knelt down next to us, wrapping my sister and me close. Thud, thud, thud. "Call the police," my mom whispered to my dad. The knocking instantly stopped. My dad looked over his shoulder at us. "Do you think—" He was cut off by frantic knocking that trailed off to a polite tap, tap, tap. "Police?" Something said from the other side of the door. The voice from outside sounded exactly like my mom, like a parrot repeating the words back to her. "Police. Call the police. Tap, 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 police." My mom pulled us closer. "Police. Police. 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 Please stop," I heard her whisper. "I don't think calling them will help," my dad said. "How will we know when they're the ones at the door?" The knocking came back harder than before. The door shook, then it stopped. After a long moment, I heard the knocking again, but it was coming from our back door. We all turned together towards the back door, but the knocking immediately returned to the front door. Front to back to front, loud, then quiet, then loud again. Suddenly, the sound was coming from both doors at once. Big, heavy blows like a sledgehammer. Then something started rapping against all of the windows in the house, then the walls. It was like we were living inside a drum with a dozen people trying to play at once. Or we were a turtle and something was attempting to claw us out of our shell. "Stop!" Holden yelled. The knocking died. "I won't tell," Holden said, staring at the door. "I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw. Just please go away." We waited for nearly a minute. Then we heard it, a soft tap, tap, tap coming from the window. Holden had looked through earlier. Holden started to cry, sobbing like a prisoner watching gallows being built outside their cell. My dad held him, brushed his hair, but never lied to him, never told him things would be okay. The tapping at the window happened until the end of the evening. We clustered together in the lounge room for I don't have the foggiest idea how long. In the end, my mother attempted to take us kids into my room while my father remained to watch the entryway. However, the subsequent we moved into my room, the thumping returned, so uproarious it was feasible to disregard. I was apprehensive that the entryway couldn't take it. We returned to the family room, and the thumping halted. Just the tap tap on the window remained. Not even one of us dozed that evening. The tapping halted around 7 a.m. That is about the opportunity the sun comes up here. We held up an additional 2 hours before my father opened the blinds from one window. He made all of us return to my folks' room first. I heard him open the entryway then. At that point, return. Okay, he told us. It's finished. Holden's folks returned around noon. My mother and father strolled Holden over to his home, and they all went inside for a surprisingly long time. Nola and I watched from the window. She adhered to me the entire day, right next to me, some of the time holding my hand. At the point when my folks returned, they looked bleak, however, wouldn't let us know what they said to Holden's loved ones. It was a Sunday, so we, as a whole, gone through the day together, requested pizza, and watched films. That evening, everybody dozed in my room. Nola and my mother in the bed with me, my father in a seat he'd pulled over. There was no thumping that evening or any night since. We didn't see quite a bit of Holden or his folks until the end of that week. However, by Thursday, there was a moving truck in their carport. Nola and I watched them getting together the entire evening after school. What sticks with me more than anything is the way worn out Holden and his folks looked. Each of the three had similar whiteness, bleak mouths, and lightless eyes. Indeed, even from across the road, I could perceive something was extremely off base. Holden and his family were gone before nightfall. I recollect what the first inviting board of trustees shared with my folks when we moved in. Not every person who takes a gander at the Whistler kicks the bucket, but rather even those that live have the light leave them, and their other lives are loaded with disaster. Little misfortunes. I believe Holden's folks probably looked either to comfort him on the off chance that they didn't accept, or share the weight, assuming they did. I watched Nola for a few days, cheerful and youthful and alive, and I kept thinking about whether I'd been slower in the event that she'd glanced through the window that evening. Could I have looked as well, to comfort her, to share that weight? I'm happy I don't need to find out. We actually live in that house, around there. We actually hear our Whistler strolling past each evening. The endowments, the karma, the beneficial things here are too great to even consider leaving. However, we're cautious. We don't have companions over to go through the night any longer. Furthermore, my father conceals the way into the blinds extremely well. Not that I've gone looking. A few things you simply don't have to search for.